Panic of 1893 by Joe Richezza and Joe Urban. The Panic of 1893 was one of the worst economic depressions to hit the United States. It resulted in the failure of many companies, loss of jobs, and the stock market crash causing widespread depression.
It all began when the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad Company went bankrupt on May 3, 1893. This company was one of the largest railroad companies and employers in the United States.
Soon after, the National Cordage Company, a group of rope manufacturers, also shut down. At this time, stockholders began to sell their shares to buy gold, and the gold reserves in the U.S. Department of Treasury were becoming close to their limit and were running out of gold to give. Because of this, confidence in the U.S. dollar dropped, and more companies began to go bankrupt. This included 4 railroad companies named the Erie Railroad, the Northern Pacific, Union Pacific, and Santa Fe.
In response to this crisis, President Grover Cleveland convinced Congress to repeal the Sherman-Silver Act of 1890. This act required the U.S. to increase its stock of silver by 50%, which ultimately caused for a decrease in the value of silver. Because of this, people started investing less in silver and more in gold due to the vast difference in value. Now, with people buying more gold, the reserves are running low, and President Cleveland had to request loans of gold from banks in order to make up for the loss.
By 1894, nearly a fourth of all railroads went bankrupt and almost 20% of workers were unemployed. Also, over 600 banks and 16,000 businesses failed. In response to this economic depression, people were unhappy. 2 examples of responses to this depression was Coxey's Army and the Pullman Strike.
Coxey's Army was a group of unemployed workers led by an Ohio manufacturer, Jacob S. Coxey, that marched on Washington, D.C. in 1894, demanding that the government intervene to reduce unemployment in the country. This march was the most significant and effective protest in the nation's history. Coxey wanted Congress to adopt 2 bills. The first was the Good Roads Bill, which required the government to issue $500 million to build and improve roads. The second was the Non-Interest-Bearing Bond Bill, which allowed any government to employ any unemployed man who applied for a public works position at a minimum wage of $1.50 per day. The core of Coxey's ideas were that the government should fund any programs that either provide jobs or improve the public.
The Pullman Strike was a result of business owner George Pullman refusing to lower rent expenses despite wage cuts at his factory. About 26,000 workers joined the strike, and half of them had direct affiliation with the union. Pullman did crush the strike, but he did not manage to sustain his vision of a model industrial community. After his death, the Supreme Court of Illinois forced the company to sell the town property.
Local governments struggled with the effects of the Depression. Private funds were inadequate to handle the caseload of jobless families, and local governments were the last institution of help. National finances also suffered as the U.S. Treasury ran deficits between 1894 and 1898. The Depression sparked a spirited fight in Washington over how poor of shape the nation was in. Many members of Congress pressed to add silver to the nation's money supply as they believed that the availability of more currency would cure the Depression. President Cleveland and Republicans still thought that gold should be the standard on which they based their currency. This belief is one of the reasons that influenced Cleveland to repeal the Sherman-Silver Purchase Act of 1890.
The Panic of 1893 made the Populist Party more attractive and known throughout the people. The Populist Party was against Democratic and Republican parties, and it represented the farmers because the 2 parties ignored their interests and difficulties. The Depression also contributed to the emergence of the progressive movement in the early 20th century. The economy being so unstable during the Depression, this motivated many business managers to reduce competition through mergers and acquisitions of rival firms. Companies grew larger, and giant corporations such as U.S. Steel, International Harvester, and American Tobacco came into existence. And now for a live reenactment of stockbrokers' reactions to the Panic of 1893 by Ms. Carkee's former students Allie Harb and Kyle Weidman.
Boss!
What is it, Jameson?
The Philadelphia and Reading, the Erie, the Union Pacific, the Northern Pacific, the Cording, they're all going down. They're bankrupt.
What? Show me this.
Here.
That can't be. No. This can't be.
What is it, boss?
Jameson, lock the doors. We've got a panic on our hands.